The morning was calm, the kind that feels too quiet after a week of noise and long filming hours. Sandra woke up with the faint sound of birds and the soft glow of sunlight slipping through her curtains. She walked to the door, still half asleep, expecting to see the newspaper that was usually left by the gate. But what she found instead stopped her completely. A single white tulip was lying on the mat, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a thin piece of string. There was no card, no name, nothing to explain who had left it. She looked around the porch and then down the street. But there was no one in sight. The air smelled fresh, with a hint of rain still clinging to the ground. For a few seconds, she just stood there, staring at the flower like it was trying to tell her something. She picked it up carefully, as if afraid it might vanish. The petals were soft and slightly wet with morning dew. She whispered to herself, "Who would leave this here?" It wasn't the kind of gesture that shouted for attention. It was quiet, personal, and thoughtful, and that silence made it even more powerful. Inside the house, Sandra placed the tulip in a glass of water. She sat at the table, her coffee growing cold as her mind wandered. It had been months since she'd received anything unexpected. Her life had been busy with work, interviews, and travel. The simple rhythm of a flower on her doorstep felt out of place, yet comforting. Throughout the day, the thought of that tulip stayed with her. Between phone calls and meetings, she kept glancing at it, wondering. Flowers had meanings. She remembered hearing once that a white tulip symbolized forgiveness, peace, or new beginnings. It made her curious. Was it a coincidence, or was there someone behind this message? By evening, the quiet house felt heavier. She poured herself a cup of tea, turned on some soft music, and looked out the window. She had spent years in front of cameras, surrounded by people who spoke loudly and smiled for the world. But this moment, this small act, felt more sincere than anything else. She decided that if the flower appeared again tomorrow, she would try to find out who left it. The next morning came earlier than she expected. Sandra woke before sunrise, unsure why. She walked to the door again, heart beating a little faster. And there it was. Another tulip. This time yellow. The same brown paper, the same string. Again, no note. She picked it up and smiled without meaning to. The feeling was strange. It wasn't fear, it wasn't excitement. It was something in between, like being reminded that someone somewhere still cared. Maybe it wasn't about romance. Maybe it was about kindness. About being seen when no one was watching. On the set that day, she mentioned it casually to one of her friends from the crew. "Someone keeps leaving flowers at my door," she said with a small laugh. Her friend raised an eyebrow and joked, "Maybe you've got a secret admirer." Sandra smiled but shook her head. "It doesn't feel like that," she replied softly. "It feels different. Like there's thought behind it." As days passed, the pattern continued. One flower every morning. Red, pink, yellow, white again. Each tulip was fresh, as if it had just been picked. Her kitchen window soon became a row of colors, each in a separate glass. It made her mornings brighter and her nights quieter. But curiosity kept growing inside her. One night, while she sat near the window, she remembered something. Years ago, during a late shoot for a movie, she had a long talk with Keanu. They had been sitting near the edge of the set, away from the cameras and noise. She had been tired and frustrated that night, feeling disconnected from herself. Keanu had listened quietly and said something she never forgot. "A flower never asks to be noticed. It just blooms quietly. Sometimes the quietest things say the most." Those words echoed now stronger than ever. Could it be him? It had been months since they had met. They had always shared a bond built on respect and understanding, not gossip or fame. Both of them believed in doing small things that mattered, even when no one noticed. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself not to assume. But deep inside, something told her that the flowers carried meaning only someone like Keanu would understand. That evening, she wrote a small note on a piece of paper. Her handwriting was neat and calm. It said, "Thank you for the flowers. They mean more than you think." She folded it, placed it in an envelope, and left it at the door where the tulips usually appeared. The next morning, she rushed to check. There was no tulip this time, only her note, folded back with another paper inside it. She opened it slowly, her heart trembling with both fear and warmth. The handwriting inside was familiar, steady, thoughtful, and simple. It read, Sometimes we all need a reminder that we're still seen, still appreciated. She sat down, holding the note like it was something fragile. A deep calm spread through her. It wasn't about mystery anymore. It was about connection, about how, in a world full of noise, one act of quiet kindness could still reach straight to the heart. Sandra smiled as she looked at the tulips by her window. She didn't need to guess anymore. Some gestures don't need names to be understood. Some kindnesses speak for themselves. That night, before sleeping, she whispered softly, "Thank you." The room was silent, but she felt an invisible answer in her heart, peace, warmth, and the comfort of being remembered. The next few mornings felt lighter. Every day, Sandra walked to the door with quiet excitement, not because she needed to know who it was, but because she felt something beautiful had entered her life again. The flowers kept coming. Red tulip, pink tulip, purple tulip. Each one appeared before dawn, placed gently at her door like a secret waiting to be found. She began to wake up early just to see if she could catch the person behind it. She made tea, sat by the window, and watched. But every morning the street remained still, the sky still gray, and when she blinked, there it was again, the flower. Whoever it was moved like the wind, invisible yet full of presence. On the fifth morning, she noticed something different. The tulip had a small leaf tucked under it, shaped like a heart. It wasn't a perfect heart, but natural and raw. She smiled as she held it in her hand. She whispered, "You have a gentle soul, whoever you are." Later that day, Sandra went for a walk to clear her thoughts. She passed by a small park where children played, where the air smelled of cut grass and soft laughter. It reminded her of the simplicity of being alive, something she often forgot in her busy schedule. Fame had given her recognition, but somewhere along the way, it had stolen her quiet moments. This mystery, this silent giver, was bringing that peace back. On the way home, she stopped by a flower shop. She asked the old florist, "Do people still send flowers without notes?" The woman smiled and said, "Only when they want to speak through the petals." Sandra laughed softly and replied, "Maybe someone's been speaking to me." The florist looked curious. "If it's tulips, that means they want to say something pure." "Tulips carry honesty." That word stayed in Sandra's heart, honesty. She realized how rare it had become in her world, where everything was often painted larger than life. As the week went on, the flowers started to form a pattern. On the seventh day, she received a blue tulip, a color she didn't even know existed naturally. It looked rare, delicate, and slightly surreal. This time, she found a small piece of folded paper beneath it. Her breath caught. She picked it up and unfolded it carefully. Inside were 6 words written in simple ink. "The world is still kind, remember?" Her eyes softened. She sat down on the steps, holding the note close to her heart. It wasn't just about admiration or affection. It was about something deeper. Someone was reminding her of the goodness she often forgot existed in silence. That night, as she sat by the window, her mind wandered again to Keanu. She hadn't seen him in months. They used to meet often during projects, sometimes just to talk about life and the strange ways it tested them. He was always thoughtful, never loud, never seeking attention. His words always carried calm. She remembered one night on set when she had been frustrated with herself. She had forgotten a few lines and everything felt wrong. She was angry, tired, and ready to leave. Keanu had walked up quietly and handed her a cup of coffee without saying anything. They sat in silence until she finally said, "I feel invisible today." He had smiled and replied, "Maybe that's not a bad thing. Sometimes being unseen means you can see more clearly." That memory now felt like a thread connecting her to the flowers. The words on the note carried his kind of wisdom. It was gentle, quiet, and meaningful, but she still couldn't be sure. The next morning, she decided to do something different. She stayed near the door before sunrise, pretending to read, her eyes on the street through a small gap. Minutes passed, then an hour. She almost gave up, thinking whoever it was had stopped coming. Then, in the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow move. Slow, careful, respectful, a figure bent down near her doorstep. Her heart skipped. She waited until the person stood up again. Through the thin curtain, she caught a glimpse of dark hair, a calm posture and familiar stillness. The person turned slightly before walking away, and in that brief moment, the early light touched his face. It was him. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized it. Keanu. Not with cameras, not with a crowd, not as a star. Just himself, quiet, gentle, leaving a flower. She didn't open the door right away. She stood there for a few minutes, overwhelmed by something she couldn't name. It wasn't shock or excitement. It was something purer, the feeling of being seen in the most genuine way. When she finally stepped outside, the tulip was waiting again. This time it was orange, bright, and full of warmth. She smiled as tears formed in her eyes. She whispered, "You never changed." She picked up the flower and held it close. She knew she couldn't let this continue as a mystery. Kindness. This reel deserved a thank you face-to-face. The next day, she decided to visit the film studio where he had been working recently. She didn't plan to confront him. She only wanted to see him, to confirm the feeling that had grown inside her heart. When she reached the studio gates, she saw him talking to a crew member, helping move some props even though he wasn't required to. He was dressed simply, just like always. Humble, calm, grounded. She walked closer, and he noticed her almost instantly. His smile was soft, the same as years ago. "Hey," he said warmly. "It's been a while." Sandra smiled back, trying not to show how her heart raced. "It has," she replied. "You've been busy being mysterious, I hear." Keanu looked puzzled for a second, then chuckled softly. "Mysterious?" She tilted her head and said gently, "Flowers. Tulips. Every morning." His expression shifted, not surprise, but quiet honesty. He nodded slightly. "I wasn't sure you'd find it comforting. I just wanted to remind you of something you once told me, that kindness never really disappears. It just waits to be noticed again." Sandra didn't speak for a moment. Her eyes glistened as she said softly, "I did need that reminder." They stood there for a while, silent but peaceful. No need for more words. Sometimes the best connections don't come from grand gestures, but from small, consistent acts that touch the heart quietly. The next morning, Sandra woke up earlier than usual. The soft orange light of dawn filled her kitchen, brushing across the tulips lined by the window. Each flower had become a small chapter of something she didn't expect, a story told through silence. She made her coffee, then paused, her eyes resting on the note Keanu had left before. The words still echoed in her mind. "The world is still kind, remember?" She touched the paper gently, realizing that kindness, when it comes from the right soul, doesn't need an explanation. Still, she felt an urge to understand what had moved him to do it. What had he seen in her that made him think she needed this reminder? Maybe he had noticed the quiet sadness behind her smile. Maybe he had felt it too. Later that day, Sandra decided to visit him again. Not at work, but somewhere quieter. She knew he liked to spend his free time at a small community park that supported local artists and children. She drove there in the afternoon, hoping he would be around. As soon as she entered, she saw him near the benches, helping a little boy fix a broken paper kite. He wasn't wearing anything fancy, just a simple gray shirt and worn-out jeans. Yet he looked at peace. She stood there for a moment, watching him laugh softly as the boy ran with the kite. It wasn't a scene from a film. It was real, grounded, and pure. When he finally noticed her, he smiled. That same calm smile that could soften any storm. "You found me," he said gently, as if he already knew she would. She nodded and walked closer. "I wanted to talk," she said, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and emotion. "About the flowers." Keanu looked thoughtful. "I guessed you might." He sat on the bench and motioned for her to join. "They weren't meant to confuse you. I just wanted to remind you of something you once reminded me. That the world still has beauty when we slow down to see it." Sandra looked at him, her eyes reflecting warmth and wonder. "You remembered that?" she asked softly. "Of course," he said. "That night years ago you were tired. You told me you felt lost in the noise of everything, and I told you about the flower that blooms without asking for attention. You smiled and said, "That's how I want to live too, quietly but meaningfully." I remembered that. When I saw an interview a few weeks ago where you said you were feeling disconnected again, I thought maybe you just needed a small reminder. His words settled into the air like calm rain. Sandra blinked back a tear, not from sadness, but from being deeply seen. "It's strange," she whispered, "how something so small can bring back balance." Keanu smiled softly. "Small things always do. That's the point." For a moment, they both sat quietly, listening to the distant laughter of children, the rustle of trees, and the sound of a world that kept moving even when people forgot how to pause. Sandra felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For months, she had been carrying invisible exhaustion, the kind that comes from smiling when you're tired and speaking when your heart wants silence. She turned to him and said, "You've always had this calm. How do you keep it?" He chuckled gently. "I lose it sometimes, like everyone. But I learned that peace doesn't come from being untouched by chaos. It comes from not letting chaos steal your gentleness." Those words stayed in her mind long after he said them. She realized that was exactly what the tulips were, small symbols of gentleness left untouched by noise. Each one carried a quiet strength that reminded her how beauty could exist even in stillness. When they stood to leave, Keanu said, "I didn't plan for you to find out it was me, but I'm glad you did," she smiled. "I'm glad too. Maybe now the flowers have a story." He nodded. "They already did. You just needed to read it." As Sandra drove home that evening, the streets glowed under the fading light. She felt lighter than she had in months. The silence inside her car wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. When she reached home, she found something waiting again. But this time it wasn't a tulip. It was a small clay pot with soil and a single bulb planted inside it, next to a folded note. She brought it inside, her heart racing softly. She opened the note, and it read, "Not all kindness comes in full bloom. Some just need time and care." She smiled deeply, realizing what he meant. He was reminding her that kindness was not an act to finish. It was something to nurture, like life itself. That night, she placed the pot near her window. For the first time, she didn't wait for a flower the next morning. She already had one. It just hadn't bloomed yet. As she turned off the lights, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Keanu." And somewhere in the quiet night, the world seemed to smile back, as if it too understood what she had just learned, that love built on respect and gentle care never fades. It only grows quietly where hearts choose to notice. The next few weeks passed with a stillness that felt alive. Every morning, Sandra would water the small clay pot that Keanu had left. She spoke to it softly, like it could hear her. Each day she watched the soil, waiting for the first green leaf to appear. There was no rush, no anxiety, just patience, something she had almost forgotten to practice. She still thought about him often, not in the way of someone longing for romance, but in the way one remembers peace. Keanu's presence had always carried that energy, calm, deliberate, and honest. In a world that often demanded performance, he chose authenticity. She admired that. One morning, while she was tending to the little pot, she noticed a faint sprout breaking through the soil. It was fragile, small, and easy to miss, yet it filled her with joy. She smiled and said softly, "You're finally here." Somehow it felt like more than a flower. It felt like hope. Later that day, Sandra received a call from the studio. They wanted her and Keanu to appear together for an anniversary special about their early film days. She hesitated at first. Being in front of cameras again with him felt different now, deeper, more personal. But something inside her whispered that it was time. On the day of the interview, she arrived early. The studio was quiet, lit with soft, warm lights. While the crew set up, she walked around the set, memories flooding her mind. The laughter, the long shooting hours, the shared exhaustion that had once made her and Keanu close. Then she saw him. He walked in quietly, carrying a small cup of coffee, his usual calm smile in place. When he saw her, his eyes lit up, not with surprise, but with gentle familiarity. "You're early," he said, handing her the cup. "Still like it plain?" She smiled, touched by his memory. "Always," she replied. "Some things don't change." They sat together while the crew adjusted the lights. Between small talk and laughter, there was an unspoken understanding, the kind that doesn't need words to be felt. She looked at him and said softly, "The tulip is growing." He smiled, eyes full of quiet pride. It's amazing what a little care can do. As the cameras rolled later, they spoke about their memories from years ago. They joked about mistakes on set, shared moments that fans never saw, and reflected on how time had changed them. But beneath the laughter, there was something deeper. The sense that both had carried invisible battles through their journeys, and yet they still chose kindness as their way forward. After the interview, when the lights dimmed and the set emptied, they stayed behind for a while. Sandra leaned against a wall looking at the empty chairs where they had just sat. "It felt strange," she said quietly. "To talk about the past while feeling so much peace about it." Keanu nodded. "Maybe peace comes when you stop trying to rewrite what's already beautiful." She looked at him for a moment, studying the calm lines of his face. There was no pretense, no effort to impress, just truth. She realized then that the world often misunderstood him. People saw a mysterious star, but she saw what he truly was, a man who had made peace with simplicity. As they walked out together, a light rain began to fall. Keanu opened his umbrella and held it between them. They walked slowly through the parking lot, the sound of raindrops filling the silence. Halfway to her car, she stopped. "Keanu," she said softly, "why me? Why the flowers? Why now?" He paused, then looked at her with eyes full of sincerity. "Because you've always reminded me of Grace," he said. "And Grace deserves to be reminded it still exists." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The world seemed to slow down. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of years, of friendship, of understanding, of quiet care. Finally, she smiled and said, "Thank you. I don't think you realize how much that meant." He shook his head gently. "I do, because you once did the same for me." They stood there, sharing a silence that was full of meaning. It wasn't love as the world defined it. It was something deeper, rarer. It was respect that had turned into care, care that had turned into quiet companionship. When Sandra got home later, the first thing she did was check the tulip. The little sprout had grown taller. She laughed softly to herself. It was as if the flower had heard their conversation. She knelt down beside it and whispered, "You're growing faster now. Maybe because the world around you feels kinder." For the first time in a long while, she slept without worry, knowing that sometimes the best gifts in life don't arrive with explanations. They arrive quietly, through people who understand you without needing to be told. The days that followed felt lighter, like life had slowed down just enough for Sandra to notice the beauty in small things again. She no longer rushed her mornings. She took time to water the tulip, open the curtains, and let the sunlight reach every corner of her home. The once quiet house had started to feel alive again. Each day, the flower grew stronger. Its stem stood taller, its leaves stretched wider, and every inch of it seemed to whisper something to her. Patience, care, and faith. Watching it bloom reminded her of something Keanu once said during a long conversation years ago. "Growth doesn't make noise. It just happens when you keep showing up." That thought stayed with her. She realized how many years she had spent running, performing, and pushing herself to meet expectations of directors, of the audience, even of her own perfectionism. She had forgotten the quiet rhythm of being human. But now, in the stillness that Keanu's gesture had brought into her life, she was learning to breathe again. One afternoon, she decided to visit the park where she had seen him with the children. She brought coffee for two, hoping to find him there again. When she arrived, he was exactly where she expected him to be, sitting on a bench under a tall oak tree, watching the sunset through the leaves. His posture was relaxed, almost meditative. She walked up and handed him a cup. "Still black, no sugar, right?" she said with a smile. He nodded, smiling back. "You remembered." They sat quietly for a while, sipping coffee, watching the sky turn gold and pink. The world around them was noisy, children laughing, dogs barking, people chatting, but somehow, where they sat, it felt peaceful. After a few moments, Sandra spoke. "The tulip finally bloomed," she said softly. Keanu turned to her, his expression gentle. "How does it look?" "Beautiful," she said. "But more than that, it feels alive." "Like it's been listening?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe it has. Sometimes nature hears more than people do." She looked down at her hands, thinking carefully before speaking again. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. "You always do these things for others, quietly, without letting anyone notice. Doesn't it ever feel lonely? Giving so much and never asking for anything back?" Keanu was silent for a moment. He looked at the horizon, the last bit of sunlight touching his face. Then he said, "I think loneliness comes when you give to be seen. But when you give because it feels right, you never feel empty. You feel connected, even in silence." Those words hit her deeply. She realized that was what made him different. He didn't help people to earn gratitude. He helped because it was his nature to heal quietly. They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, like two souls resting in understanding. After a while, he turned to her. "Do you know what I admired most about you back then?" he asked. She looked at him curiously. "What?" "Your kindness," he said. "Not the kind people show on camera, but the kind that shows up when no one's watching. I saw you once comforting a crew member who broke down behind the set. You didn't do it because someone asked you to. You did it because you felt it. That stayed with me." Sandra's eyes softened. She didn't remember that moment, but hearing it from him filled her heart with warmth. "I didn't know you noticed," she said quietly. "I always notice," he replied simply. "You taught me that compassion isn't about being loud. It's about being present." For a while, neither spoke. The wind moved gently through the trees. Sandra felt something inside her shift, a sense of calm mixed with understanding. She realized that what connected them wasn't fame or shared work or even old friendship. It was something more subtle, an unspoken belief in the power of gentleness. Before they parted, Keanu said softly, "Sometimes, when life feels heavy, don't look for a person to fix it. Look for something small that reminds you life is still beautiful. A flower, a sound, a simple act of care. It's enough to bring your strength back." That night, Sandra went home and couldn't stop thinking about his words. She walked into her garden, barefoot, the air cool against her skin. She stood before the tulip, which had now fully bloomed, pure white with soft edges that looked almost like light. It swayed gently in the breeze, as if it understood her heart. She knelt down beside it and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the flower, but to the person who had taught her to notice it. In the days that followed, she started bringing small tulips to other people, to the makeup artist who always worked late, to the assistant who rarely took breaks, to the neighbor who lived alone. She never left her name, just a flower wrapped in brown paper with a single line written on it. "The world is still kind. Remember." And one by one, those flowers began to spread small smiles through her world. She noticed how even the hardest people softened when they found one. Something about that silent gesture made them feel human again. Weeks later, Keanu came by her home unexpectedly. He knocked softly, and when she opened the door, she saw him standing there with the same calm smile. "You've been busy," he said, looking at the tulip vases lined up by her window. She smiled shyly. "Maybe I learned from the best," he chuckled quietly. "No," he said. "You just remembered who you already were." They sat together in the garden, surrounded by the tulips that had now spread across the soil. The air was filled with their soft scent. The sunset painted everything in gold. For a long while, neither said a word. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already understood. As evening turned to night, Sandra looked at him and said softly, "You know, I used to think love had to be big, loud, dramatic, full of fireworks, but now I see it's the quietest form that lasts the longest." Keanu smiled, his eyes calm and kind. "Real love doesn't demand attention," he said. "It just stays, like a flower that keeps blooming even when no one's looking." She nodded, her heart full. Then maybe that's what this is, not a love story, but a story about love itself. He looked at her gently. "Maybe both," he said. They shared a small laugh, the kind that comes when words become unnecessary. In that moment, under the fading light, surrounded by tulips that once started with a single flower at her door, everything felt complete. The quiet had come full circle, kindness had turned into strength, and friendship had transformed into something timeless. A bond built not on grand gestures, but on respect, care, and the courage to be gentle in a world that often forgets how. And as the night settled softly around them, the garden glowed with tulips, each one carrying a silent promise. That kindness, once planted, never truly fades. The next morning arrived softly, with sunlight spilling gently through the curtains. Sandra woke with a quiet calm she hadn't felt in years. The world outside seemed slower, the sounds clearer, the air warmer. She walked out into her garden barefoot, feeling the cool dew against her skin. The tulips had bloomed fully now, a sea of colors, white, yellow, pink, and red, stretched before her like a living painting. Each flower carried a story, a memory, a moment that had taught her something. She smiled, thinking how everything had begun with one simple tulip left at her door. Later that day, Keanu visited again. He brought with him 2 cups of tea and a small basket of tulip bulbs. "You might need these," he said, smiling softly. "For next season." She laughed gently, taking the basket. "You think I'll keep planting them?" He nodded. "You already do. Not just here," he said, pointing toward the garden, "but in people too." His words touched her deeply. She realized he wasn't just talking about flowers. Every act of kindness, every moment of empathy, every time she chose patience over anger, those were seeds too. And just like tulips, they bloomed quietly in places she might never see. They sat down together on the wooden bench near the garden, surrounded by the sound of birds and wind. Sandra poured the tea, and for a while neither spoke. Silence had become their language, full, peaceful, and alive. After some time, she looked at him and asked, "Did you ever think something so small could change so much?" Keanu smiled, his gaze soft. "The smallest things often do. It's just that most people are too busy to notice them." She nodded, thinking of all the times she had overlooked the simple beauty around her. Sunlight on leaves, quiet laughter between takes, moments of real connection that fame could never replace. Now she noticed everything. Even the silence had its own rhythm. As the day went on, they walked through the garden together. Keanu knelt down to help her replant a few bulbs. Their hands moved through the soil side by side, calm and steady. It wasn't work, it was meditation. The earth between their fingers felt grounding, like a reminder that life always begins again, no matter how many seasons pass. When they were done, Sandra stood back and looked at the garden. It wasn't perfect. Some flowers leaned sideways, some hadn't bloomed yet, and some were fading. But that was what made it beautiful. Its imperfections. She said quietly, "I think this is what peace feels like." Keanu looked at her and replied, "Peace isn't about fixing everything. It's about loving things as they are." For a moment, she felt tears rise in her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. This friendship, this quiet love built on respect and care, had changed something inside her forever. As evening came, the golden light fell across the tulips, making them glow like little lamps in the wind. Keanu stood beside her, both of them silent, watching as the sky shifted to orange and pink. Then he turned to her and said softly, "You know, that first flower wasn't just for you." She looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "It was also for me," he said. "Because when we give something with kindness, it heals both sides." She smiled through her tears, realizing how true that was. The flowers hadn't just healed her loneliness. They had healed his quiet grief, too. the kind of heaviness that gentle souls often carry alone. They stayed there until night fell, talking about everything and nothing, about the beauty of slowing down, about the way memories stay soft when they're made with love, about how the world always finds ways to remind us that kindness still exists. Before leaving, Keanu looked at her and said, "Promise me one thing, keep planting even when it hurts, because somewhere someone will smile because of something you've grown." She nodded, her voice soft and sure. "I promise." As he walked away into the twilight, Sandra stood by her flowers, the breeze carrying their sweet scent around her. She closed her eyes, feeling the calm she had been searching for all along, not in fame, not in recognition, but in the quiet act of giving and being understood. Weeks later, the garden became a small sanctuary for others. Neighbors would stop by, drawn by the colors and the peace that lived there. Sandra began leaving flowers on other doors, repeating the kindness that once found her. She never signed her name, never took credit. She just left beauty behind and trusted it to do its work. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, she sat on the bench alone, holding a fresh white tulip in her hand. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes love doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to be kind." The wind moved softly through the garden, and the tulips swayed as if nodding in agreement. In that moment, she understood everything. That kindness, when given without reason, becomes eternal. That real love is not about grand gestures, but quiet care. And that a single flower, left at a door, could start a story that never truly ends. And as night gently wrapped the garden in silver light, Sandra smiled, knowing that some flowers never fade. They just keep blooming in the hearts they once touched.